Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to get into empathetic disagreements. And to be completely honest, this kind of got this idea from the assassination of Donald Trump. It's kind of how this came about, oddly enough. The assassination attempt, I should say.
I'm curious. Tell me, how did that influence this choice?
So, because a lot of people are saying that it is a result of the heightened political rhetoric, right? And how there's just so much discord about this election. Everybody is saying this is the most important election of our lifetime because they are claiming that, Trump is going to be a dictator and that it will ruin the country. And if we don't, then there's going to be an end to democracy. And people on the right aren't any less guilty and saying that, Biden is terrible and he's going to wreck the country and there's going to be starvation because of inflation and all this stuff. So, and also as a result, we've created this really contentious political climate where nobody in the country can disagree anymore. Like, we can't discuss these hotbed topics. We can't discuss things that we disagree with because it just evolves into just slandering. Or you just get unfriended on Facebook, which is equally unhelpful. I think that's usually what happens is you just decide somebody disagrees with you on Facebook and you just unfriend them. I don't think that's helpful.
No, but my view on Facebook anyway. I don't think
Exactly.
Facebook itself is helpful. I guess I don't understand how. I understand the heightened rhetoric. But the person who attempted to kill him was one of his followers, which I haven't been able to figure that out. They know that.
Well, he registered Republican, but he donated to a Democratic cause in the 2020 election.
I think Liz, it's who we both listen to.
Yeah.
But I think the evidence is pretty strong that he was a Trump follower.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Which is curious.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with. Here we're getting into politics.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Rittenhouse. You know that guy.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And anyway, people sure came against him too. So yes, the heightened rhetoric, and it's sad. So I had a couple yesterday. One of them is very hardcore Trump. The other is very conservative, but not Trump. And they can't talk about it in their home. And they can't talk about it. And the person who can't talk about it feels lonely because they feel like there's nothing they can discuss.
Yeah.
And so even within a couple, even though they're both conservative, they can't have a civil discourse about it.
Right.
Which is hard.
Right. So I thought it would be good to show people how to disagree and that it's okay to disagree and it's okay to be comfortable with differences. I think that it's important to do things like this because I think another thing that we can agree on is very little gets done in our government. And, I think that there's a lot that could be done to really make a difference in people's lives, but it's so divisive and there's so much political backlash. And elections are just, I feel like an election is all about who can throw the most mud. It's who can say the worst things about their political opponent, who can dig up the worst dirt. And that's what determines the election. And that's just frustrating.
Right. But I think there's another level that maybe we ought to talk about before.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, so if you have two people who, are trying to have a discussion, what is it that really makes it difficult to have in your words, an empathetic discussion? What do you think that is? I have some ideas.
I think the main thing is that validation feels too much like I agree with you.
That's part of it, certainly. And so a lot of, I say this to couples every day, that the validation doesn't mean that. But I think there's a part of it, and this happens in couples as well, where one or both of them think they are absolutely right, that they have the truth.
Yeah.
And so, and then if you throw in the idea of God is on your side,
Yep.
which is certainly true in a lot of cases, then boy, that's pretty powerful
Yep.
uh, for you to think, okay, I'm right, you're wrong, so I'm
Mhm.
not going to listen to you. So I think a lot of it is that somehow we've gotten to this place of, I guess, the words I hear, good over evil. Have you
Mhm.
know, that type of thing,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
idea,
Yep.
which, so in this discussion today, I was thinking about you and I having this discussion, and I think in the end, we're going to be fairly close together, even though, I would consider myself a liberal, you're a conservative.
Mhm.
I think we aren't that far apart on a
Yeah.
lot of issues. I would guess that's true for really the vast majority of the country,
Mhm.
that the things that, say, if we divide it into liberal and conservative, that the things that people are concerned about are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Cost of living, how do you feed your family,
Yep.
work, health care. And I mean, the issues that concern the vast majority of Americans, I think, are pretty similar.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then there are these side issues that, at least for me, get blown out of proportion.
Yep. Yep.
And they're the things that somehow people get upset about and they can't talk about. Anyway, that, so I think it's the idea of thinking that you're right.
And that your opinion is the only one that can be
Right.
right,
Right. And so
which
that makes it
yeah,
almost impossible to
right.
listen to somebody else.
Exactly. And so I think when it comes to getting things done or having a productive discussion, right? I think you've hit the nail on the head in that you have to find and start with where you do agree. Start
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well,
Find
yeah.
find the
What are the,
common
yeah.
ground.
Yeah, I agree. Like, what are the issues that we are concerned about?
Yes.
And then let's talk about those. And I know I'm comparing it to couples, but boy, the similarities are
Yeah.
there, because
Yeah.
often if I can get the couples to talk,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden what emerges is that they're actually on the same page. They've
Yeah.
just been using different words and they can't
Mhm.
get past the words. They
Yeah.
can't. And so they have a really hard time. And I think people in general have a really hard time listening to other people because they think they're right.
Yep.
And it
Yeah.
like blocks that whole process. So I think that's part of it.
And the thing is it's not about being right. It's
No,
about
I don't think it is.
yeah, it's about finding the common ground and having a
Mm-hmm.
productive conversation. And for me, it's all about getting somebody to understand my point of view. That's all I want. I think another component to this is that people think that they need to convince people that they are right. Like
Yeah.
they
Yes.
and I don't think that should be the goal. The goal
No,
shouldn't be to convince anybody of anything. I think the goal should be to help them to understand your point of view
I
and
agree with you.
yeah, and to understand that you think that we think differently, we're going to disagree, and that's okay.
Hmm. It is okay. And then the other thing I just thought about that I think gets in the way is, for whatever reason, it seems like we vilify other people.
Yes, we
Like
do.
if they think differently than we do, then they're bad people, or
Mhm.
we put any a number of names on them, which or labels, and it just isn't helpful at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can think of a really good topic right off the top of my head with this
Okay.
one, and that
Okay.
and it revolves around my faith. And a lot of these discussions are going to revolve around faith, and I think that's a
Sure.
big part of the problem is religion, right? And so a lot of these hotbed issues, religion plays a big part, and it's hard because, religious people, we have these values and we have these beliefs, and we feel like they are being mocked or invalidated, and I think there's a way to make peace with that, right? It can
Yeah.
be hard, but it really comes down to what we kind of talked about last week, and that is agency
Yeah.
and just this ability to choose. So, a lot of people label or in the past have labeled the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints anti-LGBTQ
Hmm.
because we believe and we promote marriage is between a man and a woman.
Hmm.
And I'm very comfortable with this idea that I believe that, and I teach my kids that. But I also firmly believe that people have a right to choose. And that just because I believe that doesn't mean I have the right to force my belief on somebody else. And I think where this can get so difficult and so muddled is people have a hard time with that concept of it's okay that we believe differently. I
Hmm.
believe that. And if you are in a gay relationship, I'm not going to teach my children to not like you. I'm not going to I'm not going to hate on you. I want you to be free to live your life in a happy way, and we can get along. It's okay that we're going to disagree on this kind of fundamental principle that we have. We can still get along just fine because I am happy to let you live your life and be free. I just want the same respect.
Okay, but which I appreciate, and so you and I mean, there's really no disagreement uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
on this topic. But so you do understand that that not everyone thinks the way you do,
Oh, I totally get that. Yeah.
and so what do you think that's about?
Again, I think it's really just because validation feels too much like I agree with you. And so people are afraid that if they accept somebody's lifestyle and they accept somebody's ability to choose, it's saying that I agree with your decision to sin and I'm condoning sin.
Hmm. Okay.
And I'm not going to speak for anybody else here. And I could be way off base. And now I also know that where this also can get more muddied is in terms of same-sex marriage, right?
Hmm.
And so the Obergefell decision that legalized gay marriage
Hmm.
on the federal level. And that can be a very controversial and hotbed topic for people because people believe that marriage is a religious tradition. And I've discussed this even with people of my own faith, and it's just a complicated topic. And so, I understand where people can say, I'm right because, again, I have God on my side and these are my
Right.
beliefs and this is the best way to raise a family is I think really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to just disagree with somebody, to just
R-
hold different ideas and hold space
right.
for people to have a different idea.
So same-sex marriage is legal. One of the things that really confuses me
Hmm.
is how does this hurt anyone else? Well, so if someone next door to you is a same-sex couple, how does that hurt you?
Right. And I see what you're saying. And this is something that I've thought a lot about. And I remember when the Obergefell decision happened, what was it? It was 2008, wasn't it?
Oh, I have no idea. You're going to be
Yeah.
much better informed than I am about that.
Okay. So it happened really before I came into the political scene, right? And
Uh-huh.
before I'm pretty sure it happened before I was even legally allowed to vote.
Okay.
So I remember when Proposition 8 came out in California, and I'm pretty sure that the church was pushing against Prop 8 or trying to push people in the direction of marriage
Well,
should stay between a man and a woman. And I
right.
think there
They gave quite a bit of money to fight against that.
Right. Which
Yeah.
again, I mean, do you think that's wrong for them that they were wrong to do that?
No, I think that
Okay. Yeah.
well, okay, it gets complicated because
Yeah.
is it okay for a nonprofit to immerse themselves in a political issue?
Mm,
Now, they would say it's a moral issue, which I totally understand
yeah. Yeah.
from their standpoint. So I think it's a little bit more complicated. So, they have their money. I think they get to do what they want with their money. So, whether or not they got involved, the, I mean, I don't even think about that.
Yeah.
Um, I think the interesting thing though, and I really think this is true, is on the federal level, at a federal court level, where the first case was decided that gay marriage is okay? In
Maybe?
Utah.
No. Oh,
Utah.
in Utah.
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
yeah. The first case was in Utah. And so that probably really irked them a lot. And then it went to the Supreme Court. So that
Right.
was on a federal
Yeah.
district court level.
So going back to your question of if you have a neighbor who's in a same-sex couple,
Yeah.
does it affect you? The answer is
What
no.
difference does it? It does. But see,
Yeah.
a lot of people think that it doesn't somehow,
Yeah.
and
And I
and
mean,
that's a piece I don't get it.
and it's hard for me to answer that because I don't want to speak for other people in
R-
general. Like
right.
I know what I believe and I'm perfectly comfortable with it. I'm perfectly comfortable with the fact that, you know, we're going to have this fundamental disagreement, and I'm okay. And if you have kids, yeah, let our kids play. It's fine. Right? If they have kids, we have kids. I'm okay with this. It's really hard. It's hard to answer that. I mean,
Hmm.
the only thing I can think of is just it stems from this idea of this deeply rooted belief of marriage is between a man and a woman.
No, I think you're right. I agree with that. But in the end, I think, why do you care what other people do?
Yeah,
If it's not harming you, I mean,
right. Yeah.
if it doesn't harm you
So
or
I
anyone,
know, right. Well, so I know in the past, or at least what people have said, and this is coming from my education within a BYU Idaho, which
hmm
is obviously a church school. And so they have said that really it's about children and the best environment in which to raise children, which is mother and father, right?
yeah,
That is the ideal way to raise children. And I think that that is true, but I think you can still, I personally believe that you can still get good results in other ways. So I've thought a
yeah,
lot about this. And when it comes down to it is, what is the best environment for children to thrive? And I think they just need safety, security, and people who love them. I think
right.
that no matter what you do, no matter how much money you have, raising a child as a single person is going to be tough, right?
It's more difficult.
It is more
But
difficult.
so this is where, you and I have a little bit disagreement because I
Yeah.
think there's certainly, in my mind, what I've read, there's absolutely no evidence that supports that view
Hmm.
that children are somehow better off with a mother and a father.
Yeah.
Any, and again, you can edit this out if you want to,
Hmm.
but I've said before that the research that comes out of BYU on the family issues
Hmm.
is really
Hmm.
suspect,
Right.
and most people know that because they have a well, actually we've talked about research in general,
Yes.
and it's true with research in general. If you have a particular, idea that you want to push, then usually you can manipulate the research in such a way that you get the results you want. And so I'm not saying that BYU is the only university that does this. That is
Yes.
absolutely not true. I
Yes.
think it probably happens at
All the
most.
time.
I think it happens all the time. And so this is my own experience, and I
Hmm.
think I've let our listeners know. So my dissertation, when you get a PhD, you have to do a dissertation, which is, research on a particular topic. And my topic was long-term gay male relationships.
Hmm.
And so in the end, they're really not different than long-term heterosexual relationships. They're
Yeah.
very similar. And it was the same with children. We didn't look at, the effects on children, but I know that a lot of the gay couples that I had certainly had children, and a lot of them, interestingly, come from heterosexual marriages that then divorce because one is gay, but they still have children. So
Hmm.
that they raise the children in these two different homes, and it appeared to be working well for the couple. I mean, it's not a big sample size, but so it just hasn't been my experience that is harmful to children in any way. I
And
think what's important is we've talked about this before. It's having people who love you, support you, and who you can have a healthy attachment to.
yeah. And so let's dive into this a little bit, and we'll start with our first disagreement, I guess you might call it.
Okay.
And we'll start with where we agree, right? I think we both agree that it works well, right? You can raise a healthy, happy child.
Yeah. Right.
Those are the things that you need. It is possible. So what I guess so where my beliefs or where I differ is I think that there are certain things that a child gets from having a mother and certain things that a child will get from having a father that you can't replace, right? So if you have two dads, there's certain things that a mother brings to the dynamics that you don't get. Now, I think that you can still have a healthy, happy child without that. I just think that there's still that ideal, right? And the same thing goes from if you have two women, there are certain things that a child gets from having a dad around. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
I don't know that we disagree about that because
Okay.
I'm listening to what you said, and tell me if I'm wrong,
Hmm.
that a child in a home with a mother and a father, they're going to get something different from the mother,
Yep.
which is true.
Hmm.
There's, I mean, I don't know how anybody can argue against that. The next thing you said, though, you can still raise a healthy, happy child.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, in my mind, we don't have a difference. I think if you tried to say one is better than the other, then, I mean, I don't even know how you measure that. I mean,
Right.
I don't think I could say, oh, well, I think you're wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
just think, I don't know that there's any evidence that supports that one way or the
Okay.
other. And so for me, doing the work that I do, it just goes back to if you have people who love you and support you and you have a good attachment to them, that's what really matters. And so
Mhm.
do you get something different
Yeah.
from a male female family than a male male or a female? And I don't know that there's any way you could argue against that. Of course you do, because they're
Right.
different.
Yeah. And I do know that that's where a lot of people base their argument against same-sex marriage on.
Well,
And
but they're making the assumption that one is better than the other. And I
right.
think what we can say, see, and this goes back to something we've talked about, it's just different. And
It's yeah.
people have a lot of trouble with difference,
Yeah.
accepting difference.
Yeah.
That
And right. And
yeah,
and it's okay that it is different,
yeah,
and I think you can still get, I think you can still get good results, and that's ultimately, what is important. And I think
yeah,
another thing that it comes down to is, is people believe in an afterlife and they believe in the eternities, right?
sure, sure.
And those are not invalid and by any means, but I think what you need to focus on in the here and in the now is this child being loved, and are they growing up in a healthy, happy home? Now,
Right.
do I still believe that the ideal is mom, dad, children? Yes. Am I
Hmm.
okay with people raising differently? Yes. Am I going to teach my children my beliefs? Yes. But
Which is what you should do.
yes, but I'm also going to teach them tolerance, love, and
Yeah,
acceptance.
yeah. And so I was going to say, I think you're in the minority, maybe not the minority, but I mean, there just aren't. I mean, there are many people who think the way you do. There are a lot who don't.
I think I'm
So
in the silent majority.
silent majority.
Yeah,
And maybe
it's
we need to
probably,
be more vocal. But I
yeah,
think the takeaway from this part is that different does not necessarily mean worse.
yeah.
It just means different,
And different is
or better. I
okay.
mean, doesn't different
Yeah,
doesn't necessarily mean better or worse. It's just different. And
yeah,
I think that I think you said this at the start of the episode. We need to learn to be okay with difference,
yes,
which is again, as I tie it back to my couples work.
yeah,
That's what I say that all the time to people. You did not marry yourself. You married
yeah,
someone else.
yeah.
And so you're going to have different ideas, and that is okay.
And Curtis and I are fairly similar politically, and we have certain things that we disagree on. And you know
Hmm.
what? It's okay. It's fine. We
Yeah,
can talk about it and we can listen to each other and disagree and be fine. I think that's a
yeah.
good skill to have. Okay, so I want to move on to something that we do, that I know we disagree on, fundamentally. And
Maybe we don't. Go ahead.
well, okay,
See,
I don't know. Yeah.
I think it goes back to what I was saying at first. Once you get talking to
Yeah.
someone about it, I think there are more similarities than there are differences, and
Ah,
I
you're
think
totally
that's
right.
true. I think that's true for
Yeah.
most people if they just talk about it. But, okay, go
Well,
ahead.
okay, yeah. So, well, because
What's the
the
issue?
issue that I really wanted to get, because it's so controversial and it's so hard for people to talk about, that we're going to have a discussion on this, Mark, because I am determined to do. And I've done it before. I actually did it
What is it?
on abortions.
Oh,
I want to
okay.
talk. I
Okay.
want to talk about abortion
Uh-huh.
because this is so hard for people to do, because and I understand why, because it's emotional. And so I recently did this on the political podcast that I was on, Agreeable Disagreements. I had a very
Right.
long discussion about this. And so for anyone who doesn't want to listen to that, Mark and I are going to have a little mini discussion on this. So, and now we've talked about this before, and where we both agree is that there has to be some sort of regulation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, I mean, we have different starting points.
Yeah.
For me, I think that it's a woman's body,
Yeah.
and she has the right to choose what she does with her body. That
Yeah.
for me, that's the fundamental thing, and which could apply to anything. I'm more happy.
Yeah.
We're talking about abortion. I'm just suspecting that when we get right down to it, you and I are not that different on abortion. But for me, it's the woman's fundamental right to choose.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important thing for me. Now,
Yeah.
as far as abortion, you and I have talked about it before, and I think there does need to be regulation. That and that is important. Or
Mm-hmm.
boundaries is my favorite word.
Yeah.
Putting boundaries around it. It just can't be whatever you want to do. So I don't know how you and I differ around that.
Well, I mean, because I think when it comes to a woman's right to choose, I think where I disagree is it's not just her body anymore. There's a life created within her body, and I think that's where it gets so muddy is because there's this big debate of when did life truly
That's
begin?
you're right. That's the kicker right there.
Yeah.
And so I think there are many ways that people look at when does life begin. And so
Hmm.
again, if you have this idea that, well, I'm right, life begins at time X,
Yep.
or the other person has a whole different way of seeing it. So what they're doing is they're making the choice based on when they think life begins.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Well, so tell me, Mark, when do you think life
oh,
begins?
gosh, I've never thought about it, Liz. Because I think I told you this. I mean, this just doesn't affect my life that much.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that go on in the world and in our political process that just don't affect me. I hope that means that I'm not insensitive because I go back to the woman has the right to choose, and I think there ought to be constraints around it.
Yeah.
But to get into a debate, like for you and I to decide when does life begin, you probably have an idea of what you think. And
Hmm.
honestly, I, I haven't paid enough attention to it. That sounds
Yeah.
terrible, but I just don't think about it because
Yeah.
none of my family's ever had an abortion or have had to
Hmm.
deal with it. I do
Mm-hmm.
deal with occasionally. Most women who've had abortions and want to talk about it will go to a female therapist.
Sure.
So even throughout my career, it's not that often that it happens. I do know people who come to see a therapist generally are struggling with some sort of emotional issue.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that every woman that has an abortion is going to have a strong emotional reaction or difficulty with it. But the people who generally come to seek treatment after that do. And
Hmm.
so for a certain number of women who have an abortion, it can be an extremely emotional event that they need to
Yeah.
work through. So I really haven't thought about when does life begin because it just doesn't affect my life.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
probably doesn't sound very good, does it?
I no, I think it's not that, it's not that it doesn't affect your life. I think it's more of well, and you're certainly not the only male who
Right.
feels this way because, and I think a lot of it is it's a lot harder for males to form an opinion because they feel like they don't have a right to be a part of the conversation because it's again, they're not the one who has to bear out the consequences,
No, I
right?
think you're right. I think you're absolutely right about that. But here's what I can say. You know, whatever it is, and you can talk about where when you think life began. I can honestly say, well, you've thought about this
Yeah.
bet more than I have. You have thought about this, so
Hmm.
you have your right to that opinion. That
Yeah.
and if it's different than mine, that's okay too.
Yeah.
And so I understand how that enters into the whole decision of what are the boundaries,
Yeah.
and so I get how it all fits together.
Hmm.
Um, but I think, again, I go back to the important thing for me: the woman has the right to choose.
Right. Here's where it gets muddy for me because for a very, very long time, well, for most of my life, I was very much no, a woman doesn't get the right to just choose because there's
Hmm.
a body within her body being
Right,
created. Right.
right.
And on a moral level, I'm very clear. Morally, I will never agree with the woman's decision to terminate a
Hmm.
viable pregnancy. On a
Hmm.
moral level, I'm never going to agree with it. But I understand, and this does put me very much in the minority. I understand my morals don't get to dictate the lives of other people.
Yeah, and I just wish more people would think that way. See, because when you
Yeah.
and I have this discussion, like if
Hmm.
you were taking a different stand. like your
Yeah.
morals are right,
Yeah.
then you and I would have we would have that conflict. But
Yeah.
my experience with you, you've never been that way, and that what it comes down to is your word of agency.
Mhm.
You really believe you have a strong moral code, but you also
Yeah.
believe very strongly in agency and that people have the right to choose. And so that's why I think that for you and I mean, we may disagree. Well, I don't know that I disagree even on the moral part of it. I think that it does get very hard. I'm not, so
Yeah.
I can't say that you and I have a different idea morally about this.
Well, let me
I don't know that that's true. I mean, I'd have to
yeah.
think more about it because I get stuck.
Mhm.
I acknowledge I get stuck on the whole idea that it's her body, she gets to choose. And
Mhm.
so, and what you're saying, I think,
Yeah.
is, she has her own moral code. She has to
Mhm.
live by that and whatever consequences come from, her own moral code. And I really believe that. I think it's part of being a therapist is that you really accept other people's way of living. There are many ways to
Yeah.
be happy, which includes moral codes. And so just the fact that you have maybe a different moral code, I mean, I can accept that because I believe in agency too.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
get to live the way and your family, you and Curtis want and teach your children. I think that's really important
Mhm.
that we transmit. I think it's one of our biggest responsibilities as parents that we transmit to our children our moral values.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, I think it's a problem. So,
Right.
I'm going to throw out a situation. I have
Okay.
no idea where this is going to go.
Okay.
14-year-old girl gets raped,
Mm.
becomes pregnant.
Nope. She has a right to terminate.
Okay.
Now,
See, and
yeah, and I
I mean,
think
you came up with that very quickly, which I
I
don't know that
because I've
it
thought
bothers
about it. I've thought about it before. And now, well, so this is something that I've thought about myself. What if I were raped and became pregnant as a
you.
result
Right,
of it?
right,
I
right.
personally, I wouldn't terminate. I wouldn't be able to do
Okay,
it. But
okay.
I
But,
understand because at
but
that point, that was not her choice, right?
right,
It was
right, right.
not,
Yeah.
she had no choice in the matter. So
Okay.
yes, she has the right. The other obvious exception and is the life of a mother, right? Obvious. That's another obvious, easy exception to say, you know,
Right. I mean, there are even cases. I mean, this is complicated. It's very
yes,
complicated
yes,
because what you hear in the news are kind of I don't know if you'd call them the extreme cases, but
yeah,
where the fetus is not viable at all,
yeah,
and should you be forced to carry it to term, which if because I think that there in some cases that that the fetus will not survive at all,
yeah,
and because maybe they don't have a heart or whatever it is that's going on,
yeah.
um,
Well,
and
and there's instances where a fetus has passed away. If a fetus passes away at 16 weeks,
right,
you
and
like
so
or 20 weeks, you have to
you
well,
have to
you
do
have to
something. Yeah,
yeah, you have to do something.
yeah. Well, I mean, you don't have to do something. I mean, 200 years ago, the woman would die
No,
because
there we
you
go. Life.
right. And
Yeah.
so I think you can come up with a lot of different situations. But so you see, I don't know that you and I disagree very much on that.
Well,
I
we
mean,
tried to disagree.
I'm having a hard time
Yeah. Yeah.
figuring figuring out where that is because I think where we disagree, which makes sense to me, when does life begin? But I
Yeah.
acknowledge I haven't really thought about it. What are the boundaries or constraints that you should have
Yeah.
around abortion? We may disagree on that, but so I mean, I don't know that there's that much disagreement,
Yeah.
and I think that's probably true for a lot of people too.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and the key thing, the most important thing in what we have done is and where I think it is so critical to do is to start with what you agree with.
What you
Find
agree on, yeah.
find the common ground. I
Yeah, I
think
agree
that
with
is
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is the common component. So, we tried to disagree and we did a little bit, but not very much. But,
Okay. Do we have time for one more? I
yeah,
haven't been thinking.
we'll end up
Do,
going over,
do,
but that's okay. Let's
what don't
pick a
you want to
different
do?
one.
Gun control?
Well, we tried that and we kind of agreed on it.
I know. there's not going to be a lot of disagreement because
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I'll just state my opinion. You can
Yeah.
state yours. I think people have the right to have guns.
Yeah.
There are valid reasons to do that. I think, and I'm
Hmm.
just off the top of my head, certainly hunting. A lot of people like to hunt. I don't hunt. Self-defense. I think
Yep.
that's reasonable.
Yep.
What I don't get, like if assault weapons. Why should anybody be able to? Why do you need to own an assault weapon? There's
Yeah.
absolutely no reason to have that. And so I think again there ought to be constraints around it. So is that gun control? I guess so. I also think there ought to be background checks for a
Hmm.
number of reasons because I really think that like someone, usually men, I'll make a general statement, who've had domestic violence issues, I don't think they should be able to buy a gun. I think that's just courting trouble.
See, and I've been following politics pretty
Hmm.
closely, and I've heard these arguments and I've heard these debates, and here's the problem. Neither side seems to know what in the heck they're talking about because
Mm.
the left is convinced that we need, that we need to close all of these loopholes. The right is convinced that they're there. I don't know who's right and I don't know who's wrong. All I
Well,
know is that people are getting hold of guns. Now, see, the thing is it I don't think it's just that simple because when you think of like, these people who go out like mass murderers or people go out and shoot other people with guns, not in self-defense because they're just a mentally unsound person, how are they getting the gun? I don't know. It's hard to say.
yeah,
Every case is different.
right. And so I think, I mean, if you're focusing, say, on, mass killings,
Yeah.
I don't see, that's always, then they say, okay, we need more gun control. I don't think that's going to affect it at all. I think
No.
that, I mean, that particular issue,
Yeah.
right? And so if you can certainly make it harder to get a gun, but if someone wanted to, they'll
They're gonna
find
find
somewhere.
one.
They'll
Yeah.
find something somewhere. I mean, that's especially true with access to the internet. Now, I think you can find anything,
Yeah.
that you want. And so I don't think that's the solution. As I said to you before, when we were just talking, I think it's a mental health issue. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about people who do that, they're pretty unstable. What's going on in their life that leads them to think, okay, this is what I should do. I mean, it's the same thing with the young man who tried to shoot Trump. So
Yeah.
what's going on in this kid's life
Oh
that he
yeah.
thinks that's the solution
Yeah.
to, like, I'm going to go try and kill this person? So I
Yeah.
understand, he may not agree with Trump politically, but just the idea that this is the solution to the problem,
Yes.
that's a different issue. That's not, in my mind, at least, that's not about gun control. So I think that one of the problems that happens when an event like that happens or a mass killing is that the real issues get buried by this whole thing about gun control or no gun control.
Well,
When
I
we ought
think
to be talking about mental health in our country and
yes.
access to mental health.
Yes. And I mean, and I think where to at least where this whole idea of, this push for more gun control is in other countries, like there's very, very little killings by gun. And people look at that and say, well, it's working in this country. That doesn't work. We're not other
No,
countries. We're
it,
America.
yeah, but I think I told you this that I looked at the statistics. I think it was the UK, and so it's true there weren't killings by gun, but what were there killings? I mean, there was just a different way
Yeah.
that people were doing it, and
Yeah.
so and that's why I think it has something to do with guns, but not. I mean, not entirely. I think we don't provide enough services for those. There are
Yeah.
people in our country who are really struggling and they slip through the cracks or we don't take care of them and this is what happens.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's not, I don't know that it's the issue of gun control.
Yeah.
I really don't think that would solve the problem.
I don't think it will either. Well, and the other thing too is and people take a lot of issues and say, "Oh, well, it's working in this country." And it's like, okay, you cannot take something that's working in a country of say 15 million people, plop it into a country of 350 million people, let alone the 50 independent United States of America and expect it to work.
Right. I mean, they're different. I mean, it's apples and
Exactly.
oranges.
Yeah.
So, and again, I can't remember exactly the statistic, but I was surprised about the
Yeah.
UK. It was just some other method that people were using, well, I
Yeah.
think it had to do with suicide. That's what
Oh,
it was.
Yeah.
Suicide. So in the U.S., suicide, at least for male, using a gun is pretty common. I think it's the most
Mm-hmm.
common way. I think it's when we were talking about suicide last year. And so I looked at suicide in the UK, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that the rates are that different, but there's a lot of hanging. So
Mm.
they just use
Yeah.
a different method. Again, I think that even with suicide, in my mind, it goes back to the same thing I'm saying, that it's a mental health issue
Yeah. Yeah. I
more than anything. Now, I
but
realize I'm a therapist, so I'm going to think a lot of things are mental health issues, but I really believe that's true, that
yeah.
there are vulnerable members of our society that we don't take care of.
And you cannot deny a mentally healthy person is not going to just go out and shoot somebody.
Right. They won't. So, the fact that they have a gun or they like guns, I mean, great. If you like guns, have a gun.
Yeah.
I think people have the right to do that.
Yeah. So, okay,
So, see,
well,
yeah, we don't disagree that much. Maybe, I don't
no.
know at all.
I mean, so and
What
it's
would we disagree on? Is there a topic we disagree on?
God.
Well, okay, but that's just a belief system.
Wait.
I mean,
Oh,
but see, even that. So if you think
yeah.
about that,
Yeah.
a lot of people who believe in God, not you, I've
Uh-huh.
never felt this from you.
Yeah.
A lot of people who believe in God really think that people who are atheists are really terrible people, right? Right
No,
next to
yeah.
Satanists in it, or child, and it's just not true. I mean, it's a belief
Yeah.
system. I don't believe in it. You do. That's great. I
Yeah.
and I really believe, again. I think from the work that I do,
Mm-hmm.
people's faith is really important to them, and
And
there
yeah.
there are benefits that come from that. Just not for me, and maybe not for others, but the fact that it works for you does
Mm-hmm.
not take away anything from my life. It just
Exactly.
means you have something different that you hold on to, and I don't. And
See,
that's
and
okay.
yeah, and I think, and that's where some atheists, and obviously you don't fall into this category, but there are some people who think that, religious people or religious zealots, they want to take away the rights of others and they want to force everybody to live by these biblical rules. And well, we don't. I mean,
Well, some do.
some do, but
Some
there
do.
are, yeah, but and well, there are some atheists who think that it's a terrible thing, or some people who think that it's a very terrible thing to teach your children your religious beliefs because it makes you a bigot.
That's true. That's true. You're right.
Right?
You're right. And so, I mean, it's the same on both sides.
It
To
is. Yeah.
accept different belief systems. That
Yeah.
it's okay to be different.
Yeah. Well, because there are people who believe that my church is bigoted
Uh
because of what we believe, right? And they think that it's wrong for me to teach my children that. And there are people out there who believe that. And I mean, I'm sorry you feel that way, but you're not going to stop me teaching my children my beliefs. And that's
No,
why I think,
and
but it's why, Mark, we get along so well, is because and why our relationship works well is because we respect each other's beliefs. And I think another
yeah,
important thing is, never once have I felt that you were trying to convince me that there is no God. I've never once
yeah.
felt like you were
Well,
trying to dissuade me from my beliefs, and I've never once tried to persuade you that
right,
God does exist. And that
right.
mutual respect is so important.
Yeah. And the one thing I've really learned all the years of doing this work is that, as I said before, there are many ways to be happy in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
And, as I think about you and your family and Curtis, and, there's a lot of joy and happiness, and a lot of it comes for you from this belief system.
Hmm.
And so I say, that is great.
Yeah.
That it be, I mean, I just don't get the idea that you have to believe what I believe,
Yeah.
or that you
I think
see. I
most
think,
people fall in that category, but
yeah,
we're the silent majority. I think
probably,
it's the
probably,
vocal minority that
yeah,
gets the attention. And and I think that's another problem of why we're so divisive as a country, is because it's what sells, right? Discord sells. You never hear
right.
about the polite debates and the polite conversations that people have, but you certainly hear about those about people slandering each other. It's exciting. People want to watch it. It's entertaining.
Okay. Yeah, but so this just goes back to one of my real concerns and what I think drives a lot of this, and it's social media.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that
Mhm.
so I certainly think that there are a lot of good things that come from the internet, social
Yeah.
media, because that's what you started off,
Yep.
at the start saying, if you say something on Facebook, then all of a sudden people are piling on you.
Yep.
I don't think that's a good thing.
No?
I think that it avoids what you and I are doing,
Yes.
which is having a face-to-face conversation
Yes.
about these issues. And so what it allows people to do is to say awful things about someone else just because they believe something different, and then they disappear.
Yep.
And so I don't think it's helpful in that regard. I think it causes problems.
Yeah.
Social media is what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Right. And and I've seen people do it okay on social media. I've seen people say, hey, this is what I believe, and you're going to believe differently than me, and that's okay. I think that there is a way to go about doing it on social media. I just don't think it happens. I think people just get too passionate and they just want to spout things like, my way is the right way to live, and if you're not living my way, you're a heathen. That's just not helpful.
I think what allows them to do that is I don't necessarily think it's anonymity, but it's that I don't have to look at you.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
if I'm looking at you and I say, I don't know, all these terrible things that people say on the internet,
Yeah.
people generally don't do that.
No.
And
I
so,
think you're right.
but it's that distance that gets created. I don't see you. All I'm seeing is words.
Yep.
I'm not actually looking at you. And so, I can say these awful things.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's that it's the humanity. You
Yeah.
lose humanity
You
when
do.
when you're not
That's it.
face to face.
That's
So,
it. Yeah, I think, and so what we're missing, I think, again, I don't want to go off into, the problems with the internet and social media, but what we've lost is that face-to-face connection, which
yeah.
I think is really important
Yeah.
in being able to accept differences from other people.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, so I think the takeaway is, and I just realized this, that what really needs to happen is more face-to-face conversations, because I think it's only in that environment that you can really understand where the other person is coming from, and to be able to accept that there are differences, and that's okay.
Yeah. It
That's
still
what's
makes me
missing.
wonder why Congress can't get anything done, but that's enough.
Oh gosh.
Discussion for another time.
Oh man. Yeah.
So
What a dysfunctional body.
I know. So, but anyways, and outside of that, in terms of, just day-to-day interactions and living your life and, trying to live in harmony with the world, you need face-to-face interactions and be comfortable with disagreements and with differences. Be comfortable with difference.
I mean, it goes back to what we've said so many times before. We like connection. As a species, we like connection. And I think the problem with a lot of social media and the internet is you don't get that basic connection that we that we want and need.
It's an artificial connection.
Yeah.
It's artificial. So,
okay.
Next week, we are going to turn back to mental health matters, in that we are, and not that this isn't related to mental health, because it is, but we're going to turn back a little bit to relationships in general, but we're going to talk about jealousy. So we'll get into kind of why it happens in relationships, what's the reasoning behind it, and how you can move past it.
Right. Good.
All right. We will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.